We all know through the book and through other publications on peregrines and other species that erupted after the Madison Conference that it was a scientific conference, but it was also a conference of personal experience. I've heard Granger tell many times that he made very good friends at this conference, and it was very interesting watching these gentlemen all see each other for the first time, and some of them for a couple years, some of them for many years. There's friendship and camaraderie here. What we've asked each panelist to do is to share short reflections on the conference and what it may have meant to them. We're going to start out, we're going to go in alphabetical order. We thought that was fairest and best. Dan, you always get to go first then.
I always get to go first.
I always go last though, Dan.
You know, I can't see very well.
Would
so
you
I'm
like
gonna
to stay
come down
seated
here.
or do you want to come down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway, I guess we better start here. You do know you're getting old when you're asked to be on a history thing. And then you may have been only but a small part of this history, but you go back to it at least, and that's a long time. And then I noticed that again this morning as you struggle to recognize your fellow scientists from that time. And so everybody's squinting their eyes looking at each other's name tags. Well, this is kind of my personal view of this conference. We've heard a lot about what it has accomplished, etc., but I'm going to try to make it a little more personal. I do have to say something about the event. Tom Cade summarized it very well. But it gelled and brought together a bunch of, I think, a lot of experts as well as...
You know what the protocol is? Are we going to use this mic or that one when it's our turn?
What do we got here? Well, this is another sign. So anyway, I want to mention this. I say the effects of evolutionarily unique environmental perturbations because Joe Hickey made a big point to me and to students about evolution and about how DDE was an evolutionarily unique, more or less, molecule introduced. And so a lot of these animals couldn't handle it as well as they could, say, secondary plant compounds. And then, as it was said, it stimulated this huge effort, and it was ultimately solved, albeit I want to mention there's other conservation-related problems that need constant attention, and just listen to the papers at this meeting. I mean, it's not over, folks. Another thing I want to mention is that this conference also helped establish an entirely new field of scientific endeavor, make it respectable as ecotoxicology. And these are just but a few of the important related developments that have already been mentioned. I do want to mention number 2 here also because that hasn't been mentioned. This was Patuxent Wildlife Research Center and Denver Wildlife Research Center contributions. At one time, Patuxent and Denver were leading the world in ecotoxicological research. And Chuck Henney has written a nice review of how raptors played a part in this, and it's coming out soon. It isn't even published yet. But lessons from DDT, why do we even go back 50 years? And I think one thing, especially for you younger students in here, this is a teaching moment. History really is important. Not only because of the contributions that are made, but interesting people make history. And science and research are both fun, essential, and quite relevant. And some of the good history that you should all be involved in reading is Return of the Peregrine, which is just really an outstanding compilation of this fascinating history here that somewhat started with the Madison Conference. And then I also have a rough citation down here for Chuck Henney's upcoming chapter. So we're looking forward to that, Chuck. I don't know where Chuck is. Oh, there he is, over there. Anyway, this is also a tribute to people. There's a lot of people involved. Rachel Carson that gets mentioned all the time and is kind of one of the key figures. Lucille Stickle and Joe Hickey. These people were also quite involved. And then I remember Joe Hickey used to tell me one thing. He says, a PhD is a doctor of knowledge. And you have to be working in the library. You spend a lot of time doing research. You do your homework. Basically, students, you do your homework. And that's what this conference was. Everybody was doing their homework, both during and after. So this is the library at the University of Wisconsin. And then I also have some personal, as a student of Joe Hickey, he and I were very good friends also. And so I came there as a kid, I guess, and so I'm thinking about what did my parents teach me was honesty, hard work, outdoor stuff is fun, value your friends, and they had a core ethic. But then Joe Hickey comes along, and then he adds this, and he insisted never anything but good science and analysis, hard-nosed professionalism, scholarship, honest writing and editing, importance of long-term data, science is exhilarating, and then core conservation ethic. This search for the eggshell thinning phenomenon, which was central but not the only thing that resulted from the Peregrine Conference at all, but I mentioned this in one of the quotes in the program, this eggshell micrometer, so I thought I better throw that in. This is what resulted from that little story, and this is also the classic, probably one of the most important graphs that resulted. This was from Derek Radcliffe's time series work, and this shows that 1947 was when it was just very consistent, and these kinds of patterns were seen throughout the world. But I want to tell just a little story where we actually did find eggshell thinning, and this has never been published, but we found eggshell thinning in Florida in some bald eagles. Turns out they were doing testing. I found the guy that was doing the testing. It was all top secret at the time. And we found these thin eggshells somewhat associated with the early DDT testing where they really used heavy dosages like 20 pounds per acre and that for mosquito control in those habitats. And some of the other kind of interesting things is when we were first starting to do this, we were setting up some experiments, and this is my little cabin on Lake Monona in north of Madison, where we were doing some feeding experiments on mallards, which ultimately we followed up with when I came to Davis and got some papers. But the elucidation of DDE-induced eggshell thinning wasn't a really simple thing. It involved thousands, literally thousands of people and hundreds of experiments and many different species. And it went through a series, is what I have up here. Steve, you might recognize this. This is the western grebe colony on Clear Lake, and the reason I put this in is because in some places in California, grebes are good eagle food. Anyway, describe the pattern and timing, determine relationships to environmental factors such as DDE, then identify the relationship to individual and population health, test hypotheses with controlled experiments and field sampling, and then determine physiological and biochemical mechanisms, which is still going on today. And then, of course, the predictive ability of this. So there was always a lot of controversy involved, and this is one of my favorite things. This is Gordon Edwards, a professor who staunchly defended DDT, and here's a picture of him in a field of flowers with 2 boxes of DDT in his hands with a spoonful of DDT. And this was, and they accused us, Tom Cade, Steve, all of these people that were working, of being junk scientists. But the truth of the matter is they're junk scientists themselves.
Oh, Dan, I interrupt for just a minute. When I came up to Evergreen, I let Jay Gordon take my place at Santa Barbara to lecture while I was gone, just as a matter of fairness. In the process, I talked to his secretary, who assured me that J. Gordon Edwards laid thin-shelled eggs.
Well, that's interesting too, because Joe gave a seminar at UC Davis one time when he was there, and there wasn't a very good attendance for some reason. And after the talk, it was about eggshell thinning. After the talk, he comes over to me and says, "Dan, did I lay a thin-shelled egg?" Anyway, about Joe Hickey, the event organizer. He was not only an outstanding scientist and transforming figure, he was a friend to his colleagues and a devoted family man, and he enjoyed a good time. This is also really important to me. He and his colleagues, Tom, Cade, all these other people involved, they understood the big picture. And they had the scientific expertise and training, the connections, the moxie or experience, and the insight on how to put together a big problem-solving effort. I don't want to minimize that. These people were really top-notch professionals. And then most folks involved in the plight of the peregrine, multitude of other species, still have a deep core philosophy for science-based conservation and ecological balance, plus an understanding the need for husbandry and management of resources if necessary, but not in the agricultural sense. And then much of this goes back to Aldo Leopold, who was Hickey's professor, Rachel Carson, who was Hickey's friend, and many others. So it ends, I want to end this with, this ends with the core philosophy expressed here by E.O. Wilson: the extent that we banish the rest of life, we will impoverish our own species for all time. And then to where I'm ended, I'm working, there's pelicans here. I'm sorry for that, for having that. They're not even food for raptors, but it's Leopold's land ethic, which reflects the existence of an ecological conscience, and this in turn reflects a conviction of individual responsibility for the health of the land. Health is the capacity of land for self-renewal. Conservation is our effort to understand and preserve this capacity. So that's where this deep philosophy is. It ran through all of this very, very deeply. And I'll stop at that.
Our next speaker is Dan Berger.
I came here expecting to speak to the impressions and the environment at the 1965 Peregrine Conference. And the thing that impressed me the most, and I had limited experience, but had attended a number of ornithological conferences where you pick and choose among the papers that you're going to attend and listen to, do a lot of jabbering with people in the halls who are not attending sessions. And what impressed me so much at the time was at the Madison Conference, and I'm not sure what the number of attendees were, but seems to me it was in the 50s or 60s. But
63.
Did I hear 63?
63, you heard.
That was a fairly good guess.
63.
And of course, getting to meet that number of people, most of whom were new to you, all peregrine enthusiasts, which wasn't a big deal at the time. These were people that were really dedicated. And at any rate, the attendance at the meeting was virtually universal, that everybody attended all of the sessions. Now, I'm sure that wasn't entirely true, but it certainly seemed that way to me, that there wasn't a hallway that there were people in. They were all in the sessions. And it was very, very impressive to me that there was such dedication and such interest. But of course, people had come from long distances, and I can understand that. I didn't have that far to go, so it didn't mean that much to me. And then as for Joe Hickey organizing this, I never ceased to be amazed what a great organizer he was. and that he did such a fantastic job of putting the conference together and adhering to the schedule, and just anticipating all of the problems, and it just went so smoothly all of the way. And my the reason I was involved at all was I started working on doing peregrine surveys on the Mississippi River in 1951. And my first introduction was to peregrines in 1950 at two sites in Wisconsin. Devil's Lake was one of them, and the other one was the Door County Peninsula. At any rate, then our next step was to survey the Mississippi River, where we knew there had been peregrines breeding. And in our first year, we found two pair that had young. At any rate, when Joe found out about that, I was in the right place at the right time, and because of the survey that he had done in the eastern states in '35, he got in regular contact with me and treated me as though I was a colleague. And he took a lot of stock in what I had to say, even though I had no educational advantage, but it didn't matter to him. He took me for what I was, and I respected him for that. So when he dreamed up the 1964 survey and broached the idea to me about participating or doing it, I didn't have to think very long, and chose a good partner to be with, and it was a fantastic adventure visiting all of the sites that we did visit. And the most surprising thing was that we found nothing. And we even went on up into Canada, which is outside of our jurisdiction, but just thought for the fun of it, we'll find peregrines in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, but it was not to be. And then the results of the Peregrine Conference were just so dramatic. It just generated an explosion of research, and from not only in this country but everywhere, but particularly in this country, there were so many repercussions and so much interest, and I just am still amazed by how much research came to being as a direct result of the Madison Conference. And then subsequent to that was the Audubon Conference that I believe was held in '72, where there was a much smaller group. I think there were maybe 22 of us. You were there, weren't you, Dan, at the conference in Connecticut or not? No. Anyway, it seemed there were 22 sticks in my mind. And there again, we were there at the sessions. We were all there for every meeting, and I think it went on for 2 or 3 days. And all I can say is it's a tribute to me, and I appreciate it, and I'm happy that I'm able to be back here for the 50th. I'm not in the greatest shape physically, and my hearing is severely diminished, so I'm hearing a small portion of what's going on here. So if you get blank stares when you ask me something, you'll know what it is. I had the good fortune of having one of my hearing aids conk out last night. So it was bad before and it's worse now. Thank you for putting up with me, and I appreciate being here.
about Dan is that Dan drove from Wisconsin. He left 3 days ago.